October 1882, Montana Territory. The cold came early to the mountains that year. It came without warning and without apology, the way hard things always do, settling into the valleys and the passes like it had always been there, like warmth had only ever been a rumor. The aspens along the ridge had turned gold and were already beginning to let go, leaf by leaf, surrendering to the season without resistance. Ethan Calloway understood that feeling better than most. He rode with his hat pulled low and his eyes on the trail and his mind carefully, deliberately empty. His horse, a gray roan named Dust, moved beneath him with the slow patience of an animal that had long since learned not to expect urgency from its rider. They had ridden together for 6 years. Dust knew Ethan's silences the way an old friend knows when not to speak. Right now, silence was all there was. $11. That was the sum total of 3 days in Billings trying to sell cattle to buyers who looked at a man's worn coat and hollow eyes and offered whatever they pleased because they knew he had no leverage and no alternatives. He'd taken their price without arguing. Winter didn't wait for a man to recover his pride. $11 for months of work. Enough for flour and salt and lamp oil if he was careful. Enough for something stronger if he wasn't. Ethan Calloway was 42 years old, and there were mornings he woke up genuinely surprised to still be there. He had not always been this way. There had been a time, not so many years ago, when this same man had laughed easily, had built things with his hands, not just for survival, for joy, had come home every evening to a lit window and a woman who looked at him like he was the best thing she had ever decided to trust. Margaret, and their 2 boys, Thomas, who was 7 and already serious about everything, and little Will, who was 4 and had just started calling him Pa, with the particular pride of a child who has newly mastered something important. A fever. That was all it had taken. Not a battle, not a disaster, not anything that could be pointed to or blamed or fought. Just a fever that came in January and didn't leave until it had taken all 3 of them, one after another, over 9 days that Ethan still could not fully account for in his memory. He had sat with each of them. He had held each of them. And then he had buried each of them behind the cabin in the frozen ground with his own hands. That had been 5 years ago. He stayed on the land because he didn't know where else to go. He worked the cattle because working kept the days from stretching into something unbearable. He ate and slept and rode and did what the seasons required of him. But he did not live. Not really. Living implied a future worth moving toward, and Ethan had quietly stopped believing in those. The trail curved west through a stand of ponderosa pine, the shadows long and cold across the packed earth. Another hour to the pass, then 2 more down the other side to home. He shifted in the saddle and let his mind go blank the way he had trained it to, because blank didn't hurt, and blank didn't remember the sound of Will laughing, or the particular way Margaret said his name when she was trying not to smile. Then Dust stopped. Not a spook, not a stumble, just a slow, deliberate halt, ears pricked forward, nostrils working the cool air. Ethan looked up. On the far side of the trail, where the pines thinned against a rocky embankment, something sat at the base of a large tree, small, bundled, the kind of shape that could be anything. Discarded gear, an animal, a pack left behind when a wagon got too heavy, and the people inside it made the calculations that desperate travel forces on a person. Ethan sat still and watched. The shape moved. He guided Dust off the trail without fully deciding to. As he drew closer, the details assembled themselves with the slow, awful clarity of something you cannot unsee once you have seen it. Not gear, not an animal. A child. A girl, 8 or 9 years old, her back pressed against the bark of the pine tree like it was the last solid thing in her world. Her dress was torn along the hem and gray with trail dust. Her face was burned raw from a day of sun, her lips cracked and bleeding. Her dark hair was matted and tangled, and her legs, both of them, lay twisted beneath her in a way that stopped Ethan's breath for just a moment. Not injury, something she had been born with. One knee locked inward at a sharp angle, one foot turned almost completely sideways. A life lived different, a life that would have made every single mile of a wagon journey harder than it should have been. She was not crying. That was the thing that reached inside him and grabbed hold of something he thought was long since past grabbing. She had no tears left. Her small chest rose and fell in dry, shuddering waves. Her eyes, when they lifted to find his face, were not the eyes of a child. They were the eyes of someone who had already finished grieving, for the situation, for herself, for whatever hope she might have once carried. Quiet, still, done. Ethan dismounted. His boots met the pine needles with a soft crunch that made her flinch, though she did not try to move away. She couldn't, and both of them understood that without saying it. He crouched a few feet from her, keeping low, keeping his voice as even as he could manage. "You hurt?" She looked at him for a long moment, deciding whether he was real and whether it mattered. "My legs don't work right," she said finally. Her voice was barely there. "They never have." "I can see that. Anywhere else hurting?" She shook her head. "Where are your people?" Her hands, small and dirty, twisted slowly in the fabric of her dress. The wind pushed through the pines above them. Dust exhaled behind him. The silence held, and Ethan waited in it because he knew better than to rush an answer that cost something to give. "Gone," she said at last. One word. Ethan had used it himself, had heard in his own voice that exact flatness, not devastation, not anger, just the sound of a door that has been closed from the outside and locked. "Gone where?" "Just gone." Her voice dropped further. "Pa said I was too slow, said when trouble came, Indians, weather, wolves, I couldn't keep up, said it was better to leave me where God could decide." She paused. "Ma left me water and hardtack. She was crying, but she didn't stop him." Something cracked open in Ethan's chest, a place he had spent 5 years sealing shut. "What's your name?" "Clara May Bennett." Careful. Memorized. A good girl, raised to answer properly even when everything else had been stripped away. "How long have you been here, Clara?" She looked at the sky, at the sun now grazing the mountain peaks. "Since it was straight up." 6 hours. A child alone on a mountain trail for 6 hours, with nothing but a canteen and whatever faith she could still manage that someone worth trusting might come along. "You have any other kin? Grandparents? Anyone?" "No, sir. Pa's people died in the war. Ma's people stopped writing when she married him." Ethan stood. He walked back to dust and unhooked the canteen, returned, held it out. "Small sips, your stomach's empty." She took it in both hands and drank with the careful discipline of a child who knew hunger, who knew not to trust relief too quickly. He watched her force herself to pause between swallows, self-control born from a life that had never offered much comfort and had taught her not to expect it. "Can you ride?" he asked. She looked at his horse, at her legs, back at him. "I don't know. We'll figure it out." He lifted her carefully, one arm beneath her knees, one at her back. She weighed almost nothing, and that lightness said more about her life than anything she could have told him. He settled her into the saddle in front of him and felt every muscle in her small body go rigid, braced against the possibility that this too would dissolve into nothing the moment she let herself believe it. "Lean back," he said quietly. "I've got you. I won't let you fall." She didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, like a decision made against every lesson her life had taught her, she leaned back against his chest. They rode into the darkening. After a while, her voice came soft through the sound of hooves on stone and the wind in the pines. "Are you going to leave me too?" Ethan was quiet. He thought about the easy answer, the kind one, but something about this child, about the way she had accepted everything without drama, told him she had already heard enough comfortable lies to last a lifetime. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. She didn't argue, didn't plead. She simply accepted it, the way someone does when uncertainty is the best thing they have been taught to hope for. And somehow that quiet acceptance hurt more than tears would have. Ethan felt something shift in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. The cabin was cold and dark and stripped of warmth. No curtains, no second chair, no signs that a family had ever made it soft. Ethan built a fire while Clara sat against the wall and watched him with careful eyes, reading the room the way displaced people always do, measuring safety, calculating how long they might be permitted to stay. He heated beans and salted meat, set half in front of her without ceremony. She ate slowly, with that same careful discipline, like a child who knew hunger well enough not to trust that it had gone. "Thank you," she said when the bowl was empty. 2 words. They moved through Ethan like something he had not known he was waiting to hear. That night, Clara slept by the fire, wrapped in the spare blanket from the chest, and Ethan sat at the table and watched the firelight move across her face and thought about his boys. About Thomas, who had slept with one arm thrown over his face. About Will, who had gripped the edge of his blanket even in sleep, holding on. He sat with it for a long time, the grief, and alongside it, something else, something small and warm and still alive, the way a coal is alive, that he did not yet have a name for. In the morning, she was still there. She had woken before him and was sitting up by the cold ash of the fire, hands folded in her lap, waiting without demanding anything, just present. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said back. And something settled between them that neither of them had words for yet. The weeks that followed were not easy or dramatic. Ethan was not a man built for warmth, and Clara was not a child who pushed for it, but a rhythm developed, slow and careful, like 2 people learning a language they had both forgotten. He built her a low crutch from pine and leather so she could move around without waiting for help. She learned what chores she could manage and did them without being asked. He stopped eating alone. She stopped waking in the night, reaching for a world that had already left her. It was in the 3rd week that Ethan first heard about Harlan Cross. Cross was the man who had been quietly buying land across the northern valley for the past 2 years, pushing small ranchers out by whatever means he suited him, forged tax records, hired intimidation, and when those failed, other things that were harder to trace. He ran a sawmill east of town, and the rumor was that he also ran something else, something that decent people spoke about only in lowered voices. Children brought through on the pretext of ranch work, sold further west to men who needed labor and asked no questions. The sheriff, a man named Aldridge, was Cross's cousin by marriage. The circuit judge made irregular visits and rarely ruled against the established interests of the valley. Justice in this part of Montana was largely a theoretical concept. Ethan might have let it remain background noise. It had nothing to do with him. Then one afternoon, a rancher named Holt rode up to the cabin with a hard look on his face and news that made Ethan's hands go still. "Harlan has been asking around about an abandoned girl on the North Trail," Holt said, not looking at Clara, who was sitting on the porch steps. "Word is he knows she's here, says she's unclaimed property, says he has papers." Ethan looked at Clara. She had gone very still, the way prey goes still. She had heard every word. "She's not property," Ethan said. "I know that, you know that." Holt met his eyes. "Cross doesn't operate on what people know. He operates on what he can make stick." That evening, after Clara was asleep, Ethan sat at the table with a lamp and thought for a long time. He thought about riding away, about the path of least resistance, about all the reasons this was not his fight. He had $11 and one horse and a broken life and no standing in any court in this territory. Then he thought about a child leaning back against a stranger in the dark because she had nothing left to lose and someone had simply asked her to trust him. He started making plans. Holt had connections, a former U.S. Marshal named Deering who worked out of Helena and had been building a case against Cross for 8 months. Ethan rode to Helena in 2 days and laid out everything he knew. Deering listened with the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting for a piece that completes a larger puzzle. "The girl is the witness I've been missing," Deering said. "Cross's operation leaves a trail, but I need someone the court can put a face to." "She's 9 years old," Ethan said. "I know, but she's also the bravest person in this room by the sound of it." Ethan rode back and sat with Clara that evening on the cabin steps and told her the truth, all of it. What Cross wanted, what Deering was trying to do, what it would mean to stand up in front of a court and say what she knew. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a while, looking out at the mountains going dark against the sky. "How many other children?" she asked. "Deering thinks more than 30 over 2 years. Another silence. Then, "Will you be there?" "Every minute," he said. "Then I'll do it." What followed was 3 weeks of preparation and 2 of the most dangerous weeks Ethan had spent since the war. Cross sent men to the cabin twice. The first time, Ethan met them at the door with a rifle and enough stillness in his eyes that they reconsidered. The second time, Holt and 2 other ranchers were there as well, and Cross's men did not get off their horses. The trial was held in Helena before a federal judge that Cross had no reach over. Clara sat in the witness chair in a dress that Holt's wife had made for her, and she answered every question in a voice that was quiet and absolutely certain. She told what she had seen on the wagon train. She told what Cross's men had said when they came through the settlements looking for children without families. She told it all, simply and without embellishment, and the courtroom was so still you could hear the clerk's pen moving. Harlan Cross's attorney came at her hard. Clara looked at him with those ancient eyes and did not waver once. Harlan Cross was convicted on 7 counts. Sheriff Aldridge was removed from office and faced his own charges. Marshal Deering's raid on Cross's operation recovered 19 children who were returned to their families or placed in the care of decent people. On the steps of the Helena courthouse, in the pale November sunlight, Clara found Ethan's hand and held it. "You said you didn't know if you'd leave," she said. He looked down at her. "I know now." She nodded, like that was the answer she had been carrying since the night he gave her the honest one. The adoption papers were filed in Helena, processed by Marshal Deering, and signed before a federal judge who looked at them both and said, "May Calloway. Legal. Proper. Permanent." She looked at the paper for a long time, then she looked up at him. "Does this mean I can call you Pa?" Ethan's throat tightened in a way that he did not try to manage. "It means you can call me whatever you like." "Pa," she said, just to hear it, just to feel it in her mouth. He put his hand on her shoulder and did not speak for a moment, because there was nothing that language was adequate for. The winter passed, and then the spring, and Ethan built Clara a low ramp from the cabin door to the yard, and a seat on the fence so she could watch the cattle work, and eventually, working with Holt over several weekends, a modified saddle for Dust, fitted with straps and a support brace for her legs so she could ride without danger of slipping. The first time he lifted her into that saddle and led Dust slowly around the corral, Clara's face was equal parts terror and a joy so complete it had nowhere left to go. "I'm riding," she said. "Pa, I'm actually riding." He kept his hand on the rein and walked beside her and did not say anything because his voice was not currently available to him. The following June, on a warm Sunday morning, with the first wildflowers already up in the grass, Ethan and Clara rode together to the 3 graves behind the cabin. The crosses were weathered and gray, the ground around them settled and quiet. Ethan helped Clara down and stood beside her with his hat in his hands. "I brought someone to meet you," he said to the graves. His voice was steady. He had practiced this. "This is Clara. She's mine now, not by blood, but by every choice that matters. She's braver than anyone I've ever known, and she's earned everything good that's coming to her." He stopped, started again. "I hope you know this doesn't mean I stopped carrying you. It means I finally remembered that carrying the people you've lost and loving the people still here aren't the same thing. Both can be true. I know that now." Clara bent and placed wildflowers at the base of each cross, one by one. At the last one, she stayed crouched for a moment. "I wish I'd known you," she said softly. "But I know him, and that means I know something about who you were. Thank you for making him the kind of man who stops." They stood together in the warm morning for a long time, the wind moving through the grass, the mountains steady in the distance, the sky wide and clear and full of light. When they finally rode toward home, Clara looked back once at the graves and then forward again at the trail ahead. "They'd be proud of you," she said. Ethan kept his eyes on the mountains. "They'd be proud of both of us," he said. And in the long golden light of that Montana morning, with his daughter riding beside him and the graves behind him and the future somewhere ahead, Ethan Calloway understood for the first time in 5 years what it meant to be a man moving towards something instead of away from it. Not because the grief was gone. It wasn't. It never would be entirely. But because grief and hope are not enemies. They are neighbors. And learning to live in the house between them, that was the work. That was always the work. One road, one choice, one child who asked if he was going to leave, and one man who finally found his answer. Sometimes that is all it takes to bring a life back from the edge of itself. Sometimes the most important thing a person can do is simply stop. If this story reached something in you, if you believe that no child should be left behind and no person is too broken to find their way back, please subscribe to Desert Heart. Every story we share is for the ones who were left, the ones who stayed, and the ones still finding the road home. Click subscribe, leave a comment below telling us what part of this story stayed with you, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Your support keeps these stories alive. This story carries meaning on several levels that extend well beyond entertainment. It addresses the reality of childhood disability and the cruelty of conditional love, the devastating truth that some children are measured by their usefulness rather than their worth. It shows that grief, when left unaddressed, does not protect us from further pain, it only prevents us from receiving further joy. It demonstrates that justice requires ordinary people willing to take personal risk, that communities are made strong not by their powerful members, but by their honest ones. It models chosen family with full emotional honesty, showing that love built from decision is not lesser than love built from biology. It is simply built differently, and often more deliberately. For older American viewers especially, it reflects something deeply true about the quiet heroism of those who have survived loss, and yet, without fanfare, choose to remain open to the world. And finally, it reminds us that the most consequential moments in a life often arrive looking like nothing. A shape at the side of a road, a small movement, a choice to stop or to keep riding. The whole of a life can turn on that single decision.